What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and folks, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I am excited. For the first time all season, we are moving away from Dynasty. And I love Dynasty, but my goodness, do I prefer redraft? We're not going full redraft this week, but we are looking at best ball, some things that you can do to make yourself some money. With me, as always, my co-host for this journey, Austin Amandolia. Austin, good morning. How are you doing today? I know you're excited.
Oh, I am so hyped for this morning. I like Dynasty, but I'm not good at it, and here we are, best ball redraft. I feel more competent here and I'm ready to go.
My initial reaction was to co-sign that you're not good at Dynasty because, we're in a Dynasty together, and I'm pretty sure you finished last and I finished first. So, I mean, hey. No, it's all love. And
folks, we're rebuilding.
Exactly. Rebuilding after year one. No, I'm joking. Folks, if you haven't picked up, we do have a guest this week. It is another one of Club Fantasy Zone's Chris Molina. Chris handles a lot of the prop betting stuff for us on Underdog. And when it comes to best ball, I think Chris is kind of like the go-to person we ask questions to here at Club Fantasy. Chris, welcome to the show. Introduce yourself to folks, because I know you kind of go into hibernation for the winter, so a lot of people may not be familiar with your work.
I'm in hibernation half the year. I get it. Chris Molina here. I write a few articles in the summer. I tried to write articles for this season, but that didn't last too long. I blame my prop bets not hitting, though. I'm going to be here.
There you go. For those that don't know, Chris is an attorney in real life. And so he has a job where he is helping people, protect their rights. So if he has to take a step back from fantasy football to do good in this world, we're okay with it. And I know that if I ever get in trouble, I have a friend who can help me.
I got you.
Exactly. And we all know to use allegedly whenever we talk about anything we have or may not have done. Because of Chris. Folks, as I mentioned, we are diving into best ball. And yes, we probably could have figured out how to do this draft on Underdog, but I like the ability to just have fun with this. We don't need to have any money in the game. So we're still doing it on Sleeper, but we are doing it completely with Underdog settings. So there will be 12 teams in this draft and everything else. If you've not played on Underdog, we're going to explain it here in a second. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to get the draft started so that maybe we can actually finish the draft this week. Our friend Perez is leading off the draft, not in the room right now. So this could be our first auto draft in a long while, because if you've never played on Underdog, we are talking 30-second clocks, people. So this draft is going to go fast. But Chris, I want to get everybody started with the simplest of questions. A lot of folks who have been watching this show have been talking Dynasty for the last 2-3 months, and they didn't know a lot about Dynasty for some of them. They may not understand the concept of best ball. So let's start very basic, Chris. What is best ball fantasy football?
So best ball fantasy football is where, you draft a team like normal. It's a redraft league, but you don't make any lineup changes. You don't make any ad drops. The team you draft is the team you roll with all year. The trick is, the site where you play on, I play on Underdog. Each week they put together your best starting lineup. Who scored the most points, they go directly in your lineup. That's why it's called best ball. Your best lineup is optimized every week. And there's tournaments, there's you can run leagues with friends, stuff like that. It's like a way to mock draft, but where you might have a little money in the game. So it makes instead of just you doing whatever, it makes it fun. And then you check back week 15 to see how much money you lost.
I love it. Austin, anything to throw in on that description?
No, I mean, I think that's the basics of best ball. And, the thing that I love about best ball, if you're playing in just a non-underdog DraftKings league, is it's a great time to experiment with scoring settings and trying different things, because you can just draft a team and see how it plays out. You don't have to do any of the management from day to day. It's a really fun way to introduce people to fantasy football. I think it's a better introduction than redraft for folks who have no context for football. You tell them, hey, you get 2 hours out of your calendar, and then you get the whole season to just sit back and watch what happens. I did this for my work league and introduced new people to fantasy football through best ball, and it was great. And my work league has prizes associated because I have a great firm. And so I had friends that were like, I've never played this, but I just won $100 because I took 2 hours out of my day to pick some players.
And that's what a lot of people speak kindly about best ball is, because everybody's favorite part of fantasy football is the draft. And that's what best ball is. It's the draft, but you got to go in with a strategy. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. The first thing I'm going to do is actually throw our buddy Scampers up on the screen. So there might be a lot of autos or a few autos this week. I'm actually not too concerned with there being autos because they're going to go to ADP. They're going to go to a basic roster construction. We're going to talk a lot about roster construction. If this draft would have been empty, except for my 2 drafters, there's still value in talking to these 2 about how they're going to build their teams based on the players available. We might not talk a lot about these teams that are being auto-picked, but we'll figure it out from there. Chris, as I kind of just alluded to, with best ball, it sounds like it's the easiest thing in the world. I draft my team, I'm done. But you're kind of have to think about an entire season right at the very start of the draft. Like, this is the only time you're building this team. So what kind of strategies, what kind of thought process do you take in with you when you're going into your first best ball drafts of the season?
Just I guess roster construction, like given that you can't make any ad drops, you're done. Of course, if you only have 1 quarterback, like in most redraft leagues, we all mostly draft just 1 quarterback, then you're not going to have anyone for your bye week, and it's going to be that quarterback all year. You want at least 2 QBs to compete with each other for that spot in your roster week by week, as well as bye weeks. But that's, you think of some stuff like that, quarterbacks, tight ends, and, these one-off positions. And then you kind of mix and match depending on how the board goes with running backs and wide receivers.
And I'm going to have you guys dig into that a lot more as your teams start to develop. But Austin, I want you to kind of keep it going with that because Chris mentioned roster construction, which I think is important. But Chris, you hit on something that I found interesting recently, and that is bye weeks. And Austin, you and Chris, and Austin, if you guys can't see it, it's very small on the screen right now. Austin is 31 drafts in already. And he didn't do those 31 drafts since the NFL has announced their schedule. And Chris, you had a bunch of drafts pre-schedule. So I want Austin, I'm going to start with you on this one. I know you're going to have a pick coming around on the turn here in a second. How important is bye weeks? Because to me, putting it bluntly, who's not good at best ball, I thought it was arguably the most important thing. But you guys are out here knocking out drafts before the bye weeks even come in. You could just completely screw your team at that point, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you could. And bye weeks are important. Like, if you're going to draft only 2 quarterbacks, you should make sure they don't have the same bye week. But in the pre-draft process and before the schedule comes out, that's the time where there's the most variance in what could happen, about the range of outcomes that could happen. And I want to lean into that. And so I'm willing to draft before the schedule comes out because I'm just going to bet on the best players and go from there.
I think that's fair. And Chris, I'm going to have you just kind of keep on that same thing. So when you were doing your drafts pre-bye week, were you just kind of crossing your fingers the schedule was going to shake out, or you knew you were going to do enough drafts that these teams, you're just kind of rolling the dice and hoping later on they come up 7?
Yeah, and I think Austin makes a good point. Bye weeks aren't as important as we like to consider in best ball sometimes, because when you draft before the schedule comes out, let's say you do draft 2 QBs that end up having the same bye week. Well, you're kind of screwed that week. But those kind of roster builds aren't going to be similar after the bye weeks. So you kind of, if you draft 2 great QBs, if Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes are on the same bye week, you're not going to see that in best ball drafts post bye week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you guys kind of hit it on the head. Is in best ball, you're looking for the edge, and there's a ton of variance and a ton of edge before the schedule comes out. But that it's a 2-edged sword, if you will. It could come back and bite you if you get Allen and Mahomes and they end up with the same bye week. There is a concept that we did not talk a lot about in any of our dynasty drafts, and it's a concept that has really started to creep into the vocabulary of fantasy drafters. And Austin, I'm going to start with you on this one. Stacking, and we saw it right away off the rip. Desh Wayne, Lance, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, and there's probably a few other ones out there that I haven't quite found yet, but those jumped right off the board. I mean, actually, I don't think there is one yet. So Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. Talk to me about stacking in best ball. And do you go full stacks? How big are you willing to stack? It's something that kind of, I don't know if it started in best ball or started in DFS, but it certainly bled into fantasy football in general.
Yeah, stacking is everything in best ball. within reason. So I'm going to stack my receiver with a quarterback. Especially if I have a pass catching running back, I'll stack them with their quarterback. I'm gonna aim to get to hit on as many players from the same team as possible within reason. So I'm not gonna reach too far to make a stack work, because I don't want to give up on the value of the player that I can get at a given spot just for the sake of building that stack. So, for example, when I got to the 2 spot, I was looking to take Mark Andrews there. And I'm going to talk about that more later in the terms of the stack, because initially you could think that's weird because I started with Tyreek Hill. But I wanted Mark Andrews there. I wanted Mark Andrews on my team, but I didn't want to take him in the second round. That felt like a reach to me. And sure enough, he didn't come back to me. So maybe I should have reached, but I want to stack as much as possible within reason. I don't want to, take a lower valued player just to get the stack.
Chris, do you approach it that same way when it comes to stacks? And is there a limit? Are you capping yourself at 2 receivers with the quarterback or anything like that?
I agree with Austin in terms of within reason. Let's say, we have O'Brien drafting second. He took Justin Jefferson. I'm not going to reach for Kirk Cousins unless, he falls to ADP. And I'm like, sure, I'll stack Kirk Cousins. But, I'm not going to take him 2-3 rounds above just to have the stack. Sometimes I like to stack like wide receivers and running backs together on the same team. For example, I've had a couple of drafts recently on Underdog where I started with Austin Eckler, and in the 3rd, 4th round, it's like Mike Williams or Keenan Allen's available. If I believe the Chargers are going to have a great offensive year, stacking the idea of stacking works with running back, wide receiver too. So that's something I've been doing.
Yeah. And Chris, you actually hit on a thing I think I want to make the next question, especially since neither one of you two were involved in this decision. We're heading into best ball. We're heading into redraft. Christian McCaffrey versus Justin Jefferson, I think, is going to be a hot topic for the 101 this season, Austin. So let's start with our first 2 picks of the draft. Perez took Christian McCaffrey, and then we saw Justin Jefferson, as Chris mentioned, go to O'Brien's team. So where are you on, if you have the 101, Austin, what are you doing with that pick? Is it one of these 2 or is it somebody else?
Yeah, so one thing we should just mention with this is sleeper ADP is incredibly different than underdog ADP. I can already tell. So on Underdog, it's going Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, then Christian McCaffrey. So McCaffrey's not even in the conversation for the first spot there. I'm going Justin Jefferson because I think the floor and the ceiling is there. And like we've talked about on our Dynasty shows, I worry about the upside of Christian McCaffrey with I lost his name, Elijah Mitchell in that offense, because the splits, it's too blatant that when Elijah Mitchell is on the field, Christian McCaffrey's not hitting his ceiling. So I'm taking Justin Jefferson if I have the 1 spot.
You've been pretty firm in your belief on that one. You've been sticking with that story. I appreciate that honesty, because it seems like folks are ready just to declare Christian McCaffrey the 101. Chris, how do you feel about that situation? Obviously, I don't know if you have the same feelings about the Elijah Mitchell vulture, but in a best ball draft, because that's what the show's about, you have the 101. What's your pick?
Neither. Cooper Kupp, damn it.
I love it. Chris rocking his Rams Super Bowl hat for those who are just listening in right now. So.
If it is between Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey, though, since I play a lot on Underdog, Austin mentioned it, the ADPs are very different. For example, I just took Derrick Henry in the 3rd round on an Underdog draft.
Wow.
Which leads me to take a wide receiver right away in the 1st round. It's like their wide receivers, 9, 10 of the 1st round picks are wide receivers on Underdog. So I know I'm going to get a great running back on the 2-3 turn. So I've been taking wide receivers up front, Kupp, Jefferson, Hill. And then it comes back with I could, stack them with a Henry and a Jacobs. I have that in one. Kupp, Henry, Jacobs.
I'll throw out there, just for folks who want my 2 cents. And again, keep in mind, I've started the show by saying I'm not very good at best ball. Travis Kelce's my number 1 on. I want to make sure that I have the advantage at tight end. I don't care where I'm picking. If he's there for me in the 1st round, taking him, I want that positional advantage. But I get what you guys are saying. And I actually want to talk about this a little bit, because you guys have already, I think, mentioned ADP in this episode more than we've mentioned it in all of our Dynasty stuff, because in Dynasty, putting it bluntly, you kind of throw ADP out the window. You're about building this team that you're happy with. But in this, ADP is very much about the strategy. So very quickly, for folks who may be very new to fantasy football, ADP stands for average draft position. Any website you play on is going to likely sort by either that website's projections or average draft position. And so you're going to see where a player is going and if they're in a value or not. And one thing that I love that Underdog does, but man, does it make you feel silly sometimes, is at the end of the draft, you get to see where you took a player and where they go and how much you overpaid or underpaid. And did you get a value or did you not get a value? So it's right there in your face. So Austin, I'm going to have you keep going with that. Like, ADP, very, very important. Or is this something you're kind of like studying before drafts, or is this just something you're getting as it goes when the draft is moving?
So it depends all on the type of best ball draft I am doing. And this is one thing that is an important point we need to drive home, is that with best ball, there are two different types of leagues. There's sit and go leagues, and then there's tournament leagues. In sit and go, you just draft your team and that's it for the full 17-week season. You play against the people that you've played against. You can play on Underdog. You can do 3-team leagues, 4-team, 6-team. Like,
I want to get into that more on the next question as well about these smaller leagues, because I feel like that changes your draft strategy completely. So
100%. But in tournament leagues, you're playing against 12 people for the first 14 weeks. And then after that, your goal is to advance to the next round. And you have to go, you have 3 rounds after that where you basically have to win each week if you want to maximize your winnings. And so because of that, I will draft differently based on whether I'm in a sit and go or a tournament league. In a sit and go, I'm more willing to stick pretty strictly to ADP. In a tournament, I might fluctuate a little bit to build the roster that I think is going to be optimal to advance to the next round and to ultimately max out my winnings down the stretch.
So I'm actually going to have you keep talking about that, and then we're going to get into the smaller league thing. One of the things that I noticed was a very hot topic on Twitter towards the end of, or I guess the beginning of best ball season. Anyway, folks were really looking at end of season schedules for a lot of their players and looking for those big advantages that were going to help you advance to the tournament. And I would liken this in redraft to looking at the fantasy playoffs. And my typical advice in redraft is don't worry about the fantasy playoffs, worry about making the fantasy playoffs, because your team is likely to look very different. In best ball, your team is not going to look very different. It's going to look precisely the same. So how much do you build your tournament team based on the playoffs, if you will?
Yeah, it's something to consider, especially in those tournament leagues. Like Austin said, your goal is to advance the first 14 weeks, but like if you're trying to make money, you want to do well in week 17. You want to get there and you want to do well. So, you take a look at week 17 schedules, the over-unders on team totals, who's going to be good, who's going to be bad. And then that might drive home some decisions, like when you're drafting 8th, 9th round, 10th round, who has that week 17 matchup, and who doesn't, that could end of drafts, when you're just taking dart throws, that's something to consider as well.
And Austin, I want you to continue with that, because Chris, it almost sounds like you're shooting that strategy down. And I saw a lot of that on Twitter. I don't want to say shooting it down, but it sounds like you don't put as much weight into it as other folks do. I saw a lot of that on Twitter last year. So Austin, are you along that? Like, there were people who were like building their entire roster around what these week 16, 17 matchups were. Like, they did not care about the first 15 weeks of the season. Chris, it sounds like you're like, it's a factor, but it's not the draft. Austin, are you in that same camp?
I mean, you've got to do a little bit of both, right? So you got to advance. Like, that's the first thing. So we should also just like back up a second and talk and get really specific as to what we're talking about. So I wrote down the best ball mania Underdog.
Yeah, which is the big tournament happening at Underdog right now. It's the one that pays like the large money at the end of the season.
Exactly. So the advancement rules for that are after weeks 1 through 14, you have to be the top 2 out of the 12 people you drafted with to be able to advance. After that, you have to win 2 16-person weeks in a row. You have to be the top team out of 16, 2 weeks in a row to make it to the final in week 17. There's 441 teams that make it to the end. If you make it to that week 17 matchup, you're guaranteed $1,000. Now, if you're playing this tournament, your goal is to win it, is to win the millionaire, is to win the Millie Maker.
Yeah.
And so you need to have a correlation for week 17 that is going to maximize your points. An example of this is last year, the matchup that would have really shifted it for you was Carolina versus Tampa Bay, which nobody would have been looking for at the beginning of the year because we thought Carolina was a garbage team. But if you had drafted DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Tom Brady, they would have gotten you a combined 110.18 points in week 17.
Good Lord. Well, yeah, Mike Evans had that monster week. So.
Exactly. And this is half PPR. So like a max week is like 140 to 160 points. Like that's a good week in half PPR with the roster construction we have. And those 4 players getting you 110, like that significantly increases your chances of winning the top end of prizes. So I'm going at this as a tournament in my mindset right now. And every player I have drafted so far is built around that mindset of maximizing week 17.
Interesting. But I love that you kind of sabotaged your own argument in that you were saying nobody was expecting the Tampa Bay Carolina game to be the game that mattered. So you can plan for it, but you're probably planning for the wrong game. Before we get into the draft here, and I want to dig into some of these picks that have been made, the last question I'm going to put on you guys, and Chris, since you just kind of finished up your turn, I'm going to start with you here, is how many of these smaller tournaments do you play? And I love that I have you guys on the show for this because you both play a lot of DFS on top of best ball. And I kind of like in the smaller tournaments to kind of your head-to-heads, whereas then there's the bigger, enormous tournaments. So are you using the smallers to kind of build bankroll? How do you look at the smaller tournaments, or do you strictly focus on the big tournaments on Underdog?
Are you talking like small as in like the puppies or small?
No.
Like...
I'm sorry. The quick 3-man leagues, 5-man or 6-man leagues, like where it's just very small tournaments, enormous player pool. Everybody walks away with a very, very good football team.
I play some of those leagues just because it's fun to have like a stacked you draft like a stacked
it's fun
team.
to look at that team afterward.
But it does change things. For example, if you're going to play a 3-man, everyone's running backs and wide receivers are going to be just stacked. So it changes how I do things. I personally, value quarterbacks and tight ends more. I might start, Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and that might be counterintuitive. People are like, oh, well, you just, there's only going to be like 8-9 quarterbacks drafted. But if you have you have 3 of the first 4 and Travis Kelce, that's a big positional advantage compared to like McCaffrey versus Bijan.
Yeah. Austin, just keep going with that. So, like, obviously, Chris mentioned, having the fun roster at the end is certainly fun. Are you playing in a lot of those to try to like? And I guess my question more is, where does the usefulness of these smaller tournaments, other than like it's all I had left in my wallet?
Yeah. So I look at it in terms of bankroll management, which is something we talk about a lot with DFS. It's similar to how you break up cash games versus tournament games during DFS season. So I'll use myself as an example. I've drafted 31 underdog best ball teams so far. 8 of those were 3-person, 3 were 4-person, 5 were 6-persons. Then I had 2 10-person and 2 12-person and 11 tournaments. So I've drafted 20 like sit and go drafts. And that's all about bankroll management because I think my odds of winning a 3-person league are much better. And let's say I lose every tournament. If I do well in my sit and goes, I can at least break even. And that is what I'm looking to do, is I'm looking to make sure that I am breaking even at minimum. So then the tournaments are all about the ceiling outcome. And it also enables me to be more, to like put my stake in the ground more strongly on the tournaments because I know I have these sit and go drafts to back me up in terms of bankroll management.
There you go.
And
I like it. And it's something I wanted to ask that question, Austin, as someone who edited your article for a full season. You talked a lot about that in your article about managing your bankroll between the big tournaments and the little tournaments. And I had a feeling you'd have a similar thought when it came to best ball.
Yeah. And I did a bunch of MLB best ball drafts earlier this year.
Don't talk about this Ron Ball nonsense.
And it's working out for me right now that I did this more balanced approach. Like I am advancing in about I think 2 of the 15 tournaments that I drafted so far. It's not a great advance rate. And so I'm going to probably lose most of my money on that. But in my sit and go drafts, I'm placing in 6 out of the 7 I did.
Oh, wow.
And so those are making me balance out and come out even, despite,
so you're gonna get your money back and run it back again next year. So.
Exactly. And in those 2 tournaments that I'm advancing in, like, who knows what the ceiling outcome is, but I don't have to stress about the fact that I'm only placing in 2 of those tournaments right now.
Austin is so much more disciplined a gambler than I am, because the issue I ran into with Underdog probably for the last 2 seasons is they give me my winnings before the NFL playoffs start. And then I'm like, let me build some wild ass teams for the NFL playoffs and give up back anything I actually won going back. All right, Chris, I'm going to start looking at some of these team builds, and I'm just going to kind of focus on some questions I have about some players. I'm going to kind of move along the line here. Kenny Edelman, a friend of mine from my home league, is in the 3 slot here. He took Kenneth Walker at the 410. And I feel like Kenneth Walker in that Seattle backfield right now is one of the lightning rods when it comes to fantasy football, because Walker looked good last year. So I want to kind of take this more general. What are your thoughts on Kenneth Walker? And more importantly, if you get a guy like Kenneth Walker, do you handcuff when it comes to best ball? Are you looking to add Zach Charbonnet? Kenny was not able to pull that off. Or do you avoid that altogether and you're just hoping you're right about that player when it comes to best ball, Chris?
I guess that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that backfield, Kenneth Walker versus Charbonnet. I do like Walker, and I do think, them drafting Charbonnet isn't like a nail in the coffin for his fantasy aspect or his fantasy outlook either.
Yeah.
Just like we saw when they drafted Rashad Penny versus Chris Carson. So I think there's value there, especially at the 410. He most likely scenario, he puts up a RB2 season and you got him as your RB2 in the 4th round. That's good. In terms of handcuffing, I guess it just depends. Maybe a bigger tournament, I'd want to, handcuff just in case I was wrong on Walker. But then you look at it again and you're basically paying up for Zach Charbonnet if you are wrong. So you're taking 2 picks and hopefully you are right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The look on my face had nothing to do with you. I was accidentally highlighting things on the draft board.
I saw that. Yeah. I follow the same approach in redraft. I'm like, if I'm handcuffing someone, like the popular one for years was Alexander Madison and Dalvin Cook.
Absolutely.
Like I guess I'm hoping that I'm not wrong with Dalvin Cook. In which case, I'd rather just not draft Dalvin Cook. I'd rather throw Madison at the end of my bench if I'm handcuffing someone else's team.
I like that a lot. And then, Austin, I'm going to have you keep going. Like, how do you approach first of all, what are your thoughts on Kenneth Walker this year? I do feel like 410 is probably a value, because putting it bluntly, and I understand we can't say this, but if they didn't draft Zach Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker is probably an early 2nd round pick in most fantasy drafts based on what he did last year. But all of a sudden we're getting 2 rounds of value on him because of a 3rd round rookie.
Yeah, 100%. I'm still in on Kenneth Walker this year. I do think this is also a bit of a ceiling play, potentially volatile play. I was listening to the Athletic Football Show this morning, and Nate Tice pointed out, like, his running style means he's prone to injury just because he's kind of a chaos machine, which you love him for that, right?
Exactly.
That's why you get those ceiling.
That's why I love Kenneth Walker. Yeah,
exactly. But it does mean there's risk there. And when you're drafting best ball, you're drafting saying this is what is going to happen. Like, you need to be in a mindset where you're saying this is how everything goes right. And so, yeah, I'm going to draft Kenneth Walker. I'm going to say he makes it 17 games working perfectly, and he ends up leading my team to victory. I'm not one to handcuff my own team, so I'm not going to draft Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I think, like what Chris said, I want to get other people's handcuffs, because if I drafted Kenneth Walker in the 4th round and he gets hurt, my team's probably done anyways. And so at that point, it's better for me to take dart throws elsewhere to try and get the outside for the replacement value that I'm going to lose with Kenneth Walker.
I love that. It's such a really good point, because for me, and I'm glad you guys said, like, it's a mildly viable strategy, but like for me, I would have never considered it because of how few roster spots I have. I'm like, no, I can't be wasting my pick on backups. I like the thought you guys said, where like, let me at least get someone else's backup, so there's a chance I have multiple valuable players instead of fewer valuable players. One more thing I want to ask about on Kenny's team, because he was the kind of the B part of the big news over the weekend, the Arizona Cardinals releasing DeAndre Hopkins and Kenny able to land Marquise Brown in the 7th round of this draft. Obviously there's issues at quarterback there, Chris, but 7th round for Marquise Brown, who played pretty damn well last year with Kyler Murray before his injury.
Yeah, I like the Hollywood for the cheap edition. Like, who else is there? You know, they drafted Michael Wilson out of nowhere. Rondale Moore we know what Rondale Moore is. Zach Ertz, I don't know what his recovery looks like. Second-year tight end Trey McBride. There's a lot of question marks. You know, even if it's not Kyler Murray right away, they're gonna have to throw to someone. And Hollywood Brown is reliable. I saw, stat lines last year, 7 for 70. That's perfect, especially in the 7th round.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you worried at all, Austin, about the quarterback situation in Arizona?
No, I'm not, because okay, Colt McCoy, sure, he doesn't have the ceiling play, but he can pepper a receiver with targets. Like we saw that last year, how valuable all of a sudden DeAndre Hopkins was because of how many targets he was getting from Colt McCoy. So I feel like Marquise Brown has the chance to do the same. And before D-Hop came back last year, he was killing it. All of my leagues I do pre-draft best ball leagues. And last year I had taken a lot of Lamar Jackson, Hollywood Brown stacks before Marquise Brown got traded. And when that happened, I was like, shoot, there went a bunch of my stacks. Yeah. But the first 6 weeks, he was killing it. And it wasn't until D-Hop came back that, you started to see his performance go down.
I like him. Looking at Zach's team, Chalupa Batman picking from I think it's the 5 spot. Yes, one of our guys. I was looking over his team, and the one name that has come up, I think, in every episode of Mock It Like It's Hot this season is Dalvin Cook. And you guys kind of already alluded to Dalvin Cook. But how this early in the season, Chris, how are you approaching players? And actually, Austin, I'm going to start with you because Chris is on the clock right now. We'll wait for him to get back on the turn. How are you approaching those in best ball, those questionable running backs we've been talking about for weeks, namely Cook, Mixon, and Alvin Kamara, and Cook going in the 4th round?
I think for me, it's about the variance. It's about the upside. And so taking Dalvin Cook, you said in the 4th round, taking him in the 4th round, that's his floor, right? Like if you're drafting him there, you're drafting him at his floor. And I think these running backs and these players that people are low on right now because they are worried about age or worried that they didn't do as well last season, like they are value plays right now because the touchdown regression that Dalvin Cook could have this year could shoot him back up into an RB1 candidate. And so while people are low on some players, I'm willing to take those dart throws now and get the positional advantage. I think last year, this was Josh Jacobs, right? People were down on him. He was going in the 4th, 5th round. He had one of the highest advance rates for underdog tournaments. Like teams that had him made it further in the tournament because of Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, and I guess the worry, Chris, is just with Cook ending up on the unknown team. So how do you approach the guys with questions? And the ones we've been focusing on lately have been Cook, Mixon. Mixon went in the 5th round, and I am struggling. Has Kamara not gone? Certainly has.
I mean,
scrolling the draft board here.
8.5.
Okay, so then you have Mixon in the 5th and Kamara in the 8th. How do you handle guys with big question marks in these best ball drafts? Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, I really did consider Kamara because, he might get suspended for 6 games. He might not. It might be right away. It might not. So the value to get him in the 8th round is legit, especially if, this thing drags out and he gets suspended the next year. And then you got incredible value there. In terms of Dalvin Cook, I'm a little bit more worried about Dalvin Cook just because of all the chatter coming out in Minnesota that he's a June 1st cut candidate. That worries me, but to get him again at the end of the 4th round, that means people don't want him. People are scared to get him, and it speaks to that variance point that Austin was talking about.
I like that a lot. I'm going to take a quick look at Benny Best Ball's team. First of all, I felt like he had a hell of a value on Justin Fields, landing him in the 5th round as my math is quick here, 6th or 7th quarterback off the board. I feel like Justin Fields is a hell of a best ball quarterback, but then on top of that, He also lands the Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers stack, Austin. So, or actually Chris, I always have to look at the draft and see who's about to draft. So Chris, he also landed the Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers stack. So talk to me about where you stand with Justin Fields in best ball. I feel like he almost should hold more value in best ball.
He does on Underdog.
Okay.
He goes in the 3rd round usually on Underdog, maybe if you're lucky, early 4th. But yeah, I really love his team. Fields, especially getting him so late, that creates that variance, which is something you should consider too when you're drafting, because ADPs now aren't the same as ADPs in August. So if you get Fields in the 5th round now, hypothetically, in August, he could be going in the 3rd round. So that creates a variance in itself.
Yeah.
But in terms of the rest of his team, you got to look no further than Cooper Kupp at the 106. So
yeah, I knew that one would make you happy.
I don't know. I was at the 110. I'm like, is he coming back to me?
Yeah. But yeah, and then I like backing Cooper Kupp up with Garrett Wilson, who is getting Devontae Adams comps right now from Aaron Rodgers, Austin. So how do we feel about that stack in general? Because I know this show has been so hot and cold when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, but like he is a year removed from back-to-back MVP seasons with this offensive coordinator that he's back with the Jets, but he was very bad last year.
Yeah. So it really depends on the value that you can get this stack at. And I don't want it to be my primary stack. So for Benny Best Ball's team, the fact that he has Justin Fields and Aaron Rodgers, I feel more comfortable with that. I do worry about being too in on Aaron Rodgers. So I'm going to be underweight on Aaron Rodgers stacks this year, because we saw the same thing last year with Russell Wilson, where he had a bad season the year before in Seattle. We thought, oh, he's going to Denver now. It's going to be great. He's going to be quarterback 1 on the season. And then he was awful. And so I don't want to necessarily bet on this new team being the it factor for Aaron Rodgers, but I am willing to take the ceiling if the value is there. And so getting Aaron Rodgers in the 10th round after having gotten Garrett Wilson in the 2nd round, I'm great with that. That's perfectly fine for me. But it's not going to be a stack that every time I'm like, I have to get this.
And Chris, you hit on such a good point, and you guys both talked about this earlier in the show, where the current ADP on Sleeper is very different from the current ADP on Underdog right now. So Fields looking like an immense value here. I was glad I was able to pick that one out, because clearly that would be an immense value getting him in the 5th round. So
yes, it would.
So one of the things I've noticed is we really did not have a single drafter implore 0 running back whatsoever in this draft. Is that just not a thing in best ball, Chris?
No, it definitely is a thing, especially with the wide receiver ADPs getting pushed up so high. I started Diggs, AJ Brown, but sometimes I see myself, taking 3-4 wide receivers in a row. It just depends on how you build your team. You have to have 2 running backs starting at all times. But 0 RB, can work. You're probably going to want more than 5 RBs. You're probably going to want 6. I don't know if I ever take 7 RBs in my builds, but you're just going to want to, take a bunch of dart throws and things you feel confident about, Damian Harris, or if you take Clyde Edwards-Helaire late, or that backfield in Chicago, who's going to be the starter? Take your shot on one of them.
I like that. Austin, I'm going to have you keep talking about the 0 RB strategy, but I'm going to draw attention to Michael Sicoli picking from the 12 spot with probably the closest thing we have to the Hero-RB build, where he got 1 running back. So this is going to be a very loaded question that I expect you both to be able to have some time to answer. Bijan Robinson as the 5th running back seems very different from what I've been seeing in any draft I've seen thus far. So let's start with the 0 RB, Hero-RB, and Michael Sicoli's build a little bit. He starts off with CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Christian Watson, while throwing Bijan Robinson and then Darren Waller, Dak Prescott, before he finally goes 2nd running back with David Montgomery. So is it just an instance where the Hero-RB build, especially if Bijan Robinson falls to you at the 13th pick of the draft, just works out a little bit better in best ball, Austin?
I think some of this might just be the characteristics of this draft, But I do think going some variety of hero running back is an optimal strategy in best ball tournaments. There's been data to suggest that drafting a running back before round 5 it increases your odds of advancing in tournaments. And so I am looking to try and identify a running back that I want in the first 5 rounds. And then after that, I think Sicoli killed it, like with all of the upside plays, like David Montgomery going in the 8th round right now. Like he is taking on the Jamal Williams role in that backfield. So he's going to have a lot of goal line touch opportunities. Dante Foreman, have people forgotten about him?
Like, yeah, it certainly seems so. And I'll be honest, I have a weird taste in my mouth with them. And I think it's because I was so in on Khalil Herbert, and then Deontay Foreman ruined everything, and I hate him now, I think is pretty much my problem. So,
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have that feeling, but, whatever. I'm fine with it. So, yeah, Hero-RB is the way I'm going to typically go. I could see a reason to go 0-RB, but the problem is in Underdog Best Ball. Oh, I timed out. Darn it.
Man,
that's not who I would have taken, but cool.
Terrible pick, Austin. I think I found the draft now.
So in Underdog Best Ball, it's all about the touchdowns, and having an anchor running back that is going to score touchdowns is key to having success at the position.
Oh, I like that a lot. And Chris, you kind of hit on this. So with the 0-RB thing, but how do we feel about Bijan Robinson in general? Is he another one, Chris? Is he going way earlier on Underdog?
Yeah, I think he's the RB2 on Underdog.
Okay. I saw a lot of people getting very upset about calling Bijan Robinson the RB2 on Twitter this weekend, or actually it was on a lot of the Facebook groups I'm in this weekend. So I was wondering if that was the case over on Underdog as well, because it stuck out like a sore thumb to me just based on the dynasty drafts we've been doing recently.
Yeah, I mean, I like where Sicoli got him a lot more than having to pay up for him on Underdog, especially in front of Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Eckler. I see him going before Eckler. In terms of my thoughts on Hero-RB, it's like you want Bijan to be that starter every single week, basically. So you're building your second running back position just with a bunch of dart throws: Montgomery, Foreman, Mitchell, Warren. That's how you do Hero-RB. I think that's executed well, and I hate him for taking Chig Okonkwo in the 12th round. I passed on him in the 11th round, thinking he'd get back to me.
All right, hold on a second. So I have to settle a debate that's happening on Twitter right now. So Ryan Harvey, we're going to get to your question about the 9th pick here in a second. But Kevin is actually making fun of me right here for still being on Facebook. He is calling me out for still having a Facebook. But Kevin, when you have a white beard like mine, we hang on to antiquated technologies. I got made fun of for using Mozilla Firefox when I first started podcasting. Yeah, thanks. I'm an old guy who doesn't know what the fuck I'm doing in this world. So Ryan Harvey, he's not giving you a hard time about Facebook. He's giving me a hard time about Facebook, as Kevin often does give me a hard time. But besides the point, Ryan's in the chat, and Ryan wants to know, how do we feel about his team at 9? So before I have you guys jump into your teams to recap the draft, he's in the chat. Let's please the guy. So he starts off running back, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb. Goes 3 wide receivers to start off and lands at least one of my favorite wide receivers with Keenan Allen. George Kittle in the 6th, which is a very different from what we even seen in best ball a year ago. Kittle was still a 3rd, 4th round pick a year ago. His 2 quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, Tua Tagovailoa. Then he kind of just like splits his thing up, ends his draft with Kittle as his tight end and Mike Gesicki as his only backup tight end. 3 quarterbacks. Chris, how do we feel about a squad like this? That's from the 9 spot.
I like his squad. It's different. Starting RB is tough with these wide receivers that are all getting pushed up in ADP. But when you can start Barkley and Chubb every week, then yeah, you can focus on wide receivers after that. I like the Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston stack. I know Austin is a huge fan of Quentin Johnston.
Every week do we give Austin a problem with that. So.
But Mike Williams, he deals with injuries. Keenan Allen deals with injuries. If we believe the Chargers are going to be a good offense, then why not take 2 of their wide receivers and see what happens? George Kittle is a great value. I like his his 3 QBs that should provide a good QB1 I guess score every week. Only thing I might say is only having two tight ends with Kittle, sometimes he's injury prone, and the second tight end Gesicki, I don't really like Gesicki this year, so maybe the tight end spot isn't optimized, but I like his team.
So I was going to say, I honestly was struggling to find my oops of the draft that I always like to pick on somebody in love. And that was kind of the one I was leaning to, was if I'm only running 2 tight ends, Gesicki's not my second tight end.
You'd be my third probably.
Yeah. So that was not a big favorite of mine. Austin, any additions to this team before we get into your teams?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about some things I like, some things I don't like. I like 19 of the 20 players. There's one of them I don't like. His name's Quentin Johnson.
17 of the 18.
17 of the 18. My bad. Anyways, so I like most of the players on this team. I like the 3 quarterback build, the 2 tight end build. I could see, like Chris was saying, taking a 3rd tight end. The one thing I don't like that I would improve on is 7 running backs. That's a lot of running backs, particularly when you have Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb as your top 2. I'm looking at 5 to 6 running backs. Okay. And I only take a 6th running back when I really feel like I need more depth at that position. I'm usually going 5 running backs because you can only start 2 every week, whereas you have to start 3 receivers plus a flex spot. And you usually want that flex to be a receiver because there is more ceiling with receivers than the running backs. So that's the one change I would make, is a little bit on the roster construction, but I like the players. Oh, the other change I would make, if you were doing a tournament, I do not see any week 17 correlation happening here.
Okay.
And Ryan actually took away some of my opportunities for week 17 correlation and sniped me several times throughout this draft. So way to go on that front. But that's the other thing. If you're playing in a tournament, this team is most likely not going to be optimal for winning on week 17.
All right. Chris, as you know how we finish up the show, I like to have you guys talk about your teams. If you had a strategy, if that strategy was forced to change, you do not need to talk about every player, but we're doing pretty good on time. So talk to me about your team a little bit.
Okay. I like my, first 2 picks of Diggs and AJ Brown. They should be my, I guess, building blocks for my wide receiver position every week. And then, I started taking some shots to Gabe Davis. I know we don't like him in redraft, but he has those weeks where he's 2 for 150 and 2.
Yeah.
You just sneak into the lineup there. Anthony Richardson is going in the 7th round in underdog drafts. I think the last one I seen, he was a 6th round QB. So I love that I got him in the 10th round. But it's not realistic moving forward. That's why you should draft some now, some later.
There you go.
I don't like getting sniped by Sikoli on Chigakonkwo. I think he's a great late tight end, especially when you're going 0 tight end like I did. So I was forced to settle with, Higbee, Fant, Jake Ferguson. Ferguson basically because they're a 2nd round pick. We all know how rookie tight ends are. Basically leaving the tight end position for dead in Dallas when, we've seen Blake Jarwin, we've seen Dalton Schultz, all these guys get good run from Dak Prescott. I took 6 running backs. I don't know if I like it, but who knows? Maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire was just hurt.
There you go.
It's one of those,
and the year.
Yeah, because he always starts as the main RB for KC. You never know how that backfield is going to shake out. Could be Pacheco, could be McKinnon, could be him. So I kind of had to take him. And then the build with Alec Pierce and Richardson, and then Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne. I hope Lawrence targets Etienne more. That's all I got to say.
Austin, we got some time. How would you evaluate Chris's team?
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. I love getting Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown at the beginning. I mean, that's just 2 elite players. Aaron Jones, he's just falling way too much in drafts right now. Way too much. I don't get it. He was incredible last year, and he still has RB1 upside. So I think he is a value at his current ADP. And yeah, I agree with Chris's take on Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson is currently the QB 10 on Underdog, which is mind blowing to me, given that like he's never played a snap. And I just like, I still don't, I'm not convinced that he's going to be the starter. Like people, it is May still.
Yeah. I was
like,
saying, for those that don't know, Austin has an article coming out about Jonathan Taylor, and I just gave him a hard time about this take before we started today's show that I think it's definitely Anthony Richardson, but Austin is not sold.
I am not sold. Like in August, whenever somebody says Anthony Richardson wins the starting job, then I'll believe it. But right now, I'm like, you're drafting him at his ceiling, and that ceiling includes actually starting all 17 games. So,
and keep in mind, he is talking about if you draft him on Underdog. I think Chris getting him in the 10th is probably a value.
Chris, in the 10th, after you already have Trevor Lawrence, sure, why not? Go for it. So, I like this team build overall. I think taking 3 dart throws at the end at tight end was great. You sniped me on one of your tight end picks, and that really annoyed me, but whatever.
All right, Austin, talk about your squad.
Okay, I'm going to try and not ramble too much. You might have to like cut me off at some point.
All right, I'm watching the clock. I am, because we went like 10 minutes over last week, and that pisses me off when we do that. So.
I know. Okay, so let's just get one thing very clear. If Jamar Chase was on the board at the 4 spot on Underdog, I would be taking Jamar Chase. Here's the thing. I made a little spreadsheet last night in preparation for this podcast where I was like, based on my spot, these are the players I think I'm going to get. And I built the spreadsheet so I can see what other players I want to stack and correlate. Yeah. And Tyreek Hill is currently the 4th overall pick by ADP on Underdog. And so I did all my prep for Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey and KC fell.
Yeah.
Jamar Chase, I didn't do my prep for. So I was like, well, I can't.
Ooh, you wouldn't have expected him to be there for you.
Right. I didn't expect that. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to stick with where I came in so I can like talk about what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So I took Tyreek Hill, and the goal was to target the Miami versus Baltimore Week 17 matchup. And so I wanted to go Tyreek Hill, Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson, if I could, to aim for a ceiling outcome. I didn't want to reach on Mark Andrews in the 2nd round. So I thought, okay, there's another stack that I love for Week 17. It is the Philadelphia Arizona game. And I think this is a really fun game to target because people are going to think that Arizona is going to be crappy this year and not going to want to target that. But it's kind of fun. And so you see that I ended up pivoting to a Jalen Hurts or a Philadelphia Arizona correlation. So I got Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, got that stack. And then I brought it back late with Rondale Moore and Zach Ertz. And I really like that because those are just late round dart throws. Zach Ertz is my 3rd tight end. So I'm just like waiting for him to come back off an injury and hoping that he really hits his ceiling.
I say, and you actually got credit in the draft chat on your Rondale Moore pick. So that's always a good thing. It was Michael Sicoli saying how great your value was. When the chat is telling you did well or you sniped them, it's a good thing.
Yeah. Now, I will say I got sniped early on Marquise Brown. I was going to take him with my next pick when I got sniped there. So that was a bummer. So,
and to be clear, we're all pretty sure you guys all let Marquise Brown go way too long anyway. So that's your fault.
Well, that's fair. And I was still able to get the Miami-Baltimore stack because Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham Jr. just fell so far. People are so down on this receiving core for Baltimore right now. And I'm like, y'all, this isn't the Baltimore of 2022. This is a new offense. We got a new offensive coordinator. So I'm taking the value there and taking the upside that these 2 receivers are able to take over that number 1, number 2 receiving role. Like, where's Rashad Bateman been? I feel like the wide receiver 1 spot is up for grabs in Baltimore. And so take the dart throw in the Week 17 correlation. Then I had the Dallas versus Detroit game for Week 17. That could be a fun, messy game. And I've got Tony Pollard correlated with Jameson Williams. If he comes back, catches a couple of deep bombs. And this is what I did the entire time. I just kept looking for those Week 17 matchups that I could take advantage of. Raheem Mostert was another Week 17 matchup in that Miami-Baltimore game. If Tyreek Hill catches a couple long bombs, doesn't get in the end zone, and then Raheem Mostert punches it in, like, there we go. There's a potential ceiling play. And I just did that all the way throughout. I even got the New York Giants Week 17 matchup, which let me quickly remember who they play in Week 17. They go up against a team that I really like. Oh, yeah, it's the LA Rams.
Oh, there you go. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Why am I catching strays here?
Yeah.
No, I love this as a matchup because you know what teams people aren't going to be wanting to draft a bunch of players from? The New York Giants and the LA Rams.
Yeah.
Like, this seems like the perfect team to get different on, week 17 matchup to get different on. And so having Daniel Jones and then bringing it back with Van Jefferson at the end, I was going to try and get Kyron Williams with my last pick before I auto-picked. So that's all I did. All draft was week 17 matchups, and let me build a team that I like, that I think can get me to week 17 and then get me to win when I make it to week 17.
I like it. Guys, if you've never joined the show before, I do what I typically call the oops of the draft. It's all fun. It's all learning. Normally, the oops of the draft, if this were a real draft and I knew he didn't auto pick, it would be Austin Eckler going 103 over all of these wide receivers, over Jonathan Taylor, over Bijan Robinson. That is not the pick I would make. Kenny's a friend. He auto picked it, so I'm not going to give him a hard time. Also, a friend is Kevin, and I am going to give him a hard time since he spent the chat giving me a hard time. I don't mind taking players who could potentially have bad seasons, but I think you need to limit how many. And I am worried about Kevin only having Kyle Pitts and Michael Mayer at tight end. We've talked about the struggles of rookie tight ends, and Pitts has struggled his entire time to be a viable fantasy tight end. Those are his only two tight ends. But then when you go to quarterback, he also takes 12th pick on Trey Lance, and we have no idea what's going on with Trey Lance or Desmond Ridder way down at the 18th. There are a lot of things on Kevin's team that could end up coming back to bite him in the ass. So it is all love, Kevin. I know Kevin is a great sport and understands what we're doing here, but he also gives me a hard time in the chat every single week. The only thing that could have made this team any worse is if he walked away with Cole Kmet, who I am certain he got sniped on his Michael Mayer pick because he went one pick before him on that pick. But no, all love there. The oops of the draft is just to help people learn. And what I would say the takeaway from Kevin's draft should be, make sure you're very careful about how many players who could potentially have a bad season you're putting on one singular team. Guys, that is the show. Oh, please. Absolutely.
Oh, I was going to say, sorry. I just wanted to say something about Kevin's team. I don't necessarily dislike the Trey Lance, Desmond Ridder back-to-back, because if Trey Lance is the starter for the Niners, that's massive value there. And he kind of portrays as his QB3 because Ridder is the starter in Atlanta. And Goff, I love Jared Goff this year. So I'm going to fight.
Let me be very clear. Now, first and foremost,
QBs.
I said you don't need to defend Kevin because fuck Kevin. No, like I said, in all honesty, I made the joke that the only way his team could have been worse is if he drafted Cole Kmet. I'll be perfectly blunt. I'm lying about that. His team would have been so much better if he had drafted Cole Kmet. I would have had an impossible time picking the oops of the draft. I just don't like that. We don't know what we're getting from Pitts. We hope it's better, but man, we've hoped it's better for 3 years now. And then Michael Mayer going into a team that has Austin Hooper, and rookie tight ends tend to struggle. I'm not a big fan. And I know Kevin likes I thought Kevin liked some of the rookie tight ends working with him at Football Guys. I think he liked them better than Mayer. So just not a fan of that pick altogether. But guys, that is the end of the show. We hope you all have a wonderful Memorial Day. Chris, let everybody know if you're working on anything right now or if you have anything you want to draw attention to. But more importantly, I know you are one of the best people I've seen interact on Twitter when it comes to you will inject yourself into arguments and you will be respectful and fight with facts. And then the second someone's a jerk to you, you block them and move on.
It's come through trial and error, right? We all have the time where we're just butting heads, and but I try and be better now. I'm working on a Cooper Kupp article that should be posted next week sometime about how he's still the wide receiver one. I'm looking at all you Justin Jefferson truthers. Kupp was still the wide receiver one before he got hurt last year. So that's my hill. That's the hill I'm going to die on.
Well, I was going to say, I love that your hill this year is the same as your hill last year. You were probably right. You just didn't have a chance to be right. And let's be clear, it was your hill the year before that when you were very fucking right when Cooper Kupp took over the world. So
I'm a little biased, of course, but yeah.
I love it. And you guys can follow Chris at ChrisMo2413. Like I said, a wonderful Twitter follow. If you have fantasy questions, Chris is going to give you such a great answer and be so respectful about it. Austin, you working on anything? Tell the people bye. I know you have an article dropping in 2 hours.
Yeah, I got the article on Jonathan Taylor coming up in 2 hours. Basically, you're too low on Jonathan Taylor and you need to stop. We need to get his ADP up. And then I think next week I got an article coming out. I think we're going to talk about Kyle Pitts again.
I like it.
We are going to talk about Chase Claypool. which is going to be really fun. I'm very much looking forward to
Chris,
that.
Or excuse me, Austin got made fun of for even selecting him to be the focus of an article.
I didn't make fun of him.
Yeah.
But I think
I probably didn't either because I didn't have time, but I know the rest of the chat did. So.
Yes, the rest of the chat really came after me for that. But, I'm here for it. I'll take the heat. And then one other thing I'm working on, I'm going to figure out if we are going to publish this or not, but I'm working on a tool where I'm going pick by pick for the first 2 rounds of Underdog ADP and identifying, stacking, and week 17 correlation options that I like for those players so that I can either write an article, like a pick by pick correlation, whatever, some kind of deal to help people optimize their Underdog Best Ball tournaments.
I like it. And if you've paid attention to this episode, that's big on Austin's draft strategy this year. So I'll be looking out for that myself. Guys, I'm just going to quickly run down the busy Club Fantasy schedule because if you are into fantasy football or fantasy golf, we have you covered. So I'm just breaking us down by days of the week. On Tuesdays, we have 2 great women of fantasy football shows, and one of them is about golf. We have our DFS golf show with Kelly and Adam. That comes out every Tuesday at, I believe, 8:30. They cover the tournaments. They give you the picks. They double your money. It's what they do. And then every other week, we have Her Story in the Making with Britt Flam. We were lucky enough to have the wonderful Lisa Ann on last week, so make sure you go check that episode out. It's probably the biggest guest we've ever landed at Club Fantasy. Definitely something you want to check out on that show. Great interview series. Britt Flynn did such a wonderful job. On Wednesdays, we have our flagship show, no pun intended. We are continuing our Look Inside series this week. We cover 3 teams every week leading up to the Women of Fantasy event in August. Every Sunday, we have the Dynasty After Party show. They just recorded a new episode last night, and they're kind of following the Look Inside series that we're doing right now, but they're doing it from a Dynasty aspect instead of a redraft aspect. And then, of course, every Monday, you have this show. It's a new draft next week. We're finally getting into redraft, and we have a very, very special guest that I can't wait for you guys to meet next week. So make sure you are following Club Fantasy on all the socials, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. We would very much appreciate having you a part of the club here at Club Fantasy. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for drafting with us. Always remember that defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We'll see you at the next mock draft.